السلام عليكم مرة تانية إن شاء الله الآن نستكمل المحاضرة الثانية. So we're going to begin with the second lecture, and in this lecture we discussed what we mean with the word genre or literary genres. Now in the first face-to-face class I asked the girls to keep in mind certain words that we're going to be using along the way. And one of these words were genre. The word genre sounds weird because it's originally French. It doesn't sound like the normal kind of English words. So genre as a word, it means types. So genre means types. But in our literary context, genre means, or literary genre means the different types of literary works. Now, again, the word genre means type. We have translation genres. We have medical translation, we have legal translation, religious translation. So these are the different genres of translation. What we need when we say genre in our literary classes, we mean the different types of literary works. We have four main types of literary works. That's four main types of literary genres. We have drama, fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. So when we classify, or when we generally classify literature, we classify it under these four main types. Now, someone might ask, can't drama include fiction? The answer is yes. So you might have a play that is fictional. And at the same time, can't a poem be fictional or dramatic? Of course, they can be in a general sense. But we distinguish these four different genres in this classification because each of these four has a different structure, a different method of writing, or a different way of display. Now, if we start with drama, now whenever someone says drama, I want you to remember the word play. Plays and dramas are the same. And they focus on having scenes, acts, we have characters on stage, and we always say that drama was not written to be read, but written to be played. So drama was not written to be read. And I want you to notice that this is the third tense of read. So we have read, read, read. بس يعني سبحان الله نفس الشكل إنما القراءة مختلفة. يبقى المضارع read، الماضي الثاني read، الماضي الثالث أيضا read لكن تكتب بنفس الطريقة. So drama was not written to be read. It was written to be performed, of course, on stage. Now, the other type or the other genre is called fiction. Some might say that fiction means unreal. Some say fiction means unreal, but this is a wrong understanding of fiction because, or sorry, some say that it's like, we need to distinguish between real and realistic, and how some of the events inside a novel or a story, they can be real. I'll give you an example. Now, I want to write a story about what happened in 2014, like the war on Gaza in 2014. And I want to tell the story of my friend. Now, the story is real, okay? It's real. The events are mostly real, but I add other events, I add new characters to make it look or sound more interesting. And so at the end, a part of the story is real. So I can't say that fiction means, like, fiction in literature does not necessarily mean that it's all out of one's imagination. Some parts are out of one's imagination, but sometimes, depending on the subgenre or the type of the writing, the uh, our question of whether it is a fiction or not can be answered. But in order to understand what fiction is, we need to know what nonfiction is. If I go to a school and I walk into a classroom, so I'm at a school inside a classroom, and I ask the students to show me their curricula, to show me the books that they're reading this semester as part of their history class, English class, science class. Now, these school books are considered nonfiction, they're scientific. If I go and read the newspaper is nonfiction. If I read a magazine, the magazine is nonfiction. So what is the main difference between fiction and nonfiction? We read nonfiction in order to absorb a certain level of information or a certain type of information, like the news, like facts, scientific facts, like truths that are related to the real world. So again, what is the main difference between fiction and nonfiction is that fiction is written for people's, like, to intrigue people's minds about something, about an idea, about a concept that's written by the author's style and own perception of reality. But when we talk about nonfiction, it's usually based on facts, it's based on truths, it's based on, like, the language that is used is scientific, academic, or if it is, for example, a magazine, it's written in a fun way, but at the end of the day, it's not fiction. It's not. It tells you about the best perfumes in the city. It tells you about certain people. It tells you about the developments in the world. And all of these are considered as truths, right? Now, poetry is, like, when we talk about poems, the main feature is that it's written in lines and it depends heavily on sounds, and poetry is like emotions put forward. And the main distinguishing feature is that, unlike drama, fiction, and nonfiction that are written in prose, poetry is written in verse. And like I said, it's made into lines, not paragraphs, unlike, again, fiction, nonfiction. And with drama, it's all dialogue. We might have dialogue in a poem, but a poem can't only have dialogue, can't just be dialogue. So if we look at the drama, again, it's a play for theater and uses dialogue heavily, or it only uses dialogue. We rarely have description, and description is usually limited to the beginning of the play. If the playwright wants to add something that the audience may not pay attention to, that could be added in a play by a narrator, but usually in drama, it's all about the characters on stage, it's all about the dialogue, and so on. Two types of subgenres. So we said these are genres. We have something that is called subgenre. So we have subway. So subheading. Subgenre means the like this, what comes second. So genre is the four main types, and subgenre is like the younger types, or let's say they come second. Like we have heading and one subheading and one janibi. So genre اللي هم الأهم الأنواع الأربعة وبيطلع منهم أنواع ثانية. The main two or the two main subgenres of drama are comedy and tragedy. So comedy has a happy ending and tragedy has a sad ending. And the most famous like play by Shakespeare is the Comedy of Errors and the tragic end of Hamlet. Like Hamlet can be considered a tragedy. Okay, moving forward. We have fiction, a story that did not really happen in life. Subgenres include fantasy, folklore, historical fiction, mystery, realistic fiction, and romance. Now, regarding folklore, some consider folklore as a main genre because out of this subgenre, there are other subgenres, which we will discuss in a second. But I support the claim that no, folklore is just a part of fiction, not a separate type of genre. Okay, what is fantasy? Now, fantasy is like having a world that is not real. And the example here that is given is the novel Harry Potter. Let me explain. Now, we have, for example, a place called Hogwarts, and this place doesn't exist. It's a school for wizards. And this place doesn't really exist in real life. So if the story or the novel includes a place that isn't there in real life, then it's called a fantasy. Okay, you're going to see, like, you might ask a question, what is the difference between fantasy and science fiction? Because we're going to talk about it in a minute. I think I have forgotten to add it here. The main difference between science fiction and fantasy is that, like I said, fantasy is about having a different world, about having creatures who are not real. Like we can have vampires, we can have werewolves, we can have fairies, jinniyat, elves, aqzam. So these exist in a fantasy story, but science fiction is based on science in the future. We're talking about robotics, we're talking about technologies, we're talking about advancements that have not been invented yet, but you know, the story tells us about the future. Like imagine having a story that talks about flying cars. Now we don't have flying cars, it's unreal, but it's based on science. We have planes can fly, so maybe one day cars can fly too. So that's why we considered it science fiction, but not fantasy. Folklore also includes other subgenres, and this is why I said some people consider folklore as a main genre because it includes other subgenres. But again, personally, I believe that it is a part of fiction, and then it's fine. It has other subgenres. The other subgenres include fables. Now, fables are stories that have speaking animals, and I think I provided you with an example in the classroom, and you will find the sheets, all the sheets are on Moodle, so you can go through the sheets and see examples. Fables are stories about speaking animals, and that's not only it. In order to consider it a fable, it has to have a moral at the end, and it's a story, it's a short story. So if there is a novel that includes speaking animals, I can't consider it a fable because for it to be a fable, it needs to be a part of the folklore. It needs to have a moral at the end. So it's not just for like a piece of work does not just need to be about speaking animals to be considered folklore, sorry, a fable, but it has to be a part of the country's folklore passed on by generations for it to be considered a fable and to have the moral of the story, the learned lesson in a story. Fairy tales are also considered a part of the folklore, like Rapunzel, like Cinderella, like Snow White. Legends like Zorro, and I told you, Batman is, if you don't know Zorro, he's like Batman, but instead of riding a motorcycle, he rides a horse. In our Palestinian folklore, we have Juha. Juha is considered a story of our folklore, can be maybe considered a tale or a legend. And so it is, Juha is folklore and fiction, right? So it is the subgenre is folklore, the main genre is fiction. Historical fiction, now the idea of historical fiction is that this work has certain incidents or events in the past that are real. And the example I provided in the classroom, I said, I want you to imagine the story of a young boy whose name is Ayman, who in 2014 stayed under the rubble of their house for 24 hours. Now, in 2014, there was a war on Gaza happened. In 2014, some buildings were bombarded and there were people inside them and they stayed under the wreckage or the rubble of their house a whole day. So the events are historically real. Something happened in the past that is real and is included in the novel or the story. But Ayman as a character is not real. What happened with this unreal character who is Ayman is not real. But the setting, the context, the event of war in 2014 actually happened. That's why we say it is historical fiction. It's historical, part of history, but it's not 100% real. It's part fiction, part history, part fiction. A famous novel, which is by Margaret Mitchell, Gone with the Wind. Now, the events of the novel happen in World War II. We all know that World War II happened, but the story itself and the characters are not real. Now we go to mystery, and also we're going to talk about the difference between mystery and thriller. Okay, I'll get to this when we talk about thriller. I want you to think of mystery, that it's about crimes, and one of the famous books written in this genre or subgenre, it is by Agatha Christie. We have something that is called realistic fiction. It's a lot like historical fiction. In realistic fiction, the events aren't real, but they can happen to anyone. So Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, the events, what happened in the novel could happen to everyone. Like you could meet someone, fall in love, be together, and so on. Now, regarding romance, I want you to pay attention to this because we want to make a distinction between romance or romantic literature and romantic eras or romantic authors. So like I said, we need to make a distinction between romance as part of fiction and what we'll be talking about later on, inshallah, regarding romantic poets or writers in general, or the romantic age. Now, romantic fiction, good, is about love, but the Romantic Age or Romantic era, the Romantic Age talks about authors and poets escaping life, okay, and heading towards nature. So these people, we're going to explain it in detail, inshallah, but what I want you to remember is that we have romantic poets who used nature as a source of inspiration in their writings. And those people are the ones we call romantic poets, romantic age, romantic era. Romantic fiction is about love. Okay, so I think we made it, I think now it's clear that we have two distinct things that share the same word, which is romantic. Okay, moving to science fiction, we said it happens in the future, it's not real. An example is the Hunger Games. And regarding this this novel, I said that it's ironic, very ironic, that it talks about the future and how in the future we have people put together in an arena fighting for their lives so that one person survives. This is the main concept of the book. One person should survive a fight that includes a lot of youngsters, a lot of teenagers. And I said this is ironic because although it is set to be in the future, it resembles what used to happen back in the days when we talk about how in the time of the Greeks and Romans, they used to also place people in a stadium and ask them to fight until one of them survives. So what is ironic here is that the future and the past of humans has not changed. Although there have been scientific developments, the only thing that changed is the kind of weapons that are used in the arena where these people should fight for their lives. And while other people are watching and enjoying the slaughter of people killing each other, the scene of people killing each other. So is it fantasy or science fiction? I think I made that clear that fantasy is something that is impossible to happen. And the world where the story takes place is completely imagined, like where animals talk. Some might say, is this a fable? I said for it to be a fable, it has to be a part of the folklore and it should have a moral. Science fiction, it involves new inventions and technologies, and it is in the future. It's not in the present. What is the difference between a thriller and a mystery? Now, mystery, as you can see, it's about a crime that needs solving. You don't know, like something happens, something is stolen, or someone is killed, and we start investigating what happened, looking at the clues, trying to see how things led to the murder or the robbery. And then at the very end, you find out who the killer or the thief is. But when you talk about thriller, it starts with a resolution. It starts with us knowing who the killer is, but things start to uncover we start discovering what led to the murder, what led to this person becoming a killer. So things or the events unfold gradually. What is nonfiction? Nonfiction, like we mentioned, it is academic, scientific, it gives you truths like biographies, autobiographies, having a real story, telling a real story, periodicals like magazines, newspapers, or references like dictionaries and Wikipedia. What is the difference between a biography and an autobiography? Biography is when you write about someone else's life. Like I'm going to write a book about Flan Leflani, okay? I want to write about what happened in their lives from birth to death. So this is a biography. I'm writing about someone else's life in a book. But autobiography is when one day I wake up and I decide I want to write about my own life ever since I was born until, well, not die, because if I'm dead, I can't write an autobiography, but until the day I start writing the autobiography. What about poetry? Like I said, it's the thing that distinguishes it, the fact that you use sounds, you use the form. If you remember when we talked about Easter wings, the form was part of the content. It expresses emotions, it expresses ideas in a very condensed space. Sometimes we have long poems like epics and odes, but generally, if we talk about sonnets, for example, they're short. There are different types of poetry. We have dramatic, narrative, lyric, and of course there are other types or other subgenres like the haiku, and the sonnet. And inshallah, when we discuss them in as part of the eras, we're going to learn more about them. And that's it for this lecture.